The first thing Krath ever said to me wasn't a greeting. It wasn't welcome. It wasn't even my name. It was a warning. "Whatever happens," he said in a low, serious voice, "don't let the humans notice you're afraid." At the time, I thought he was joking. I had only just arrived at the Galactic Concord Academy, dragging my travel case through the endless main corridor on 6 aching limbs after 3 hyperspace transfers and nearly 30 hours without proper sleep. My lower eyes searched for the dormitory numbers while my upper pair stayed fixed ahead, trying to avoid colliding with the endless stream of unfamiliar students. The academy was unlike anything I had imagined. The enormous corridor buzzed with life from every corner of the galaxy. 4 armed Vitali cadets stood beside a glowing hydration station, arguing loudly over class schedules. A pair of towering gray-skinned Morvac scholars glided silently past, their folded cranial crests signaling deep concentration. Young Chilari students raced along the walls, their polished shell plates clicking together in rapid bursts as they laughed among themselves. Everywhere I looked, there were species I had only ever seen in textbooks. Warriors, scientists, predators, geniuses, the future leaders of the Galactic Compact. I was still trying to convince myself I belonged there when someone stepped directly into my path. He was enormous, broad shoulders, dark armored scales, yellow predator eyes that studied me without blinking. "I've got one piece of advice for you, freshman," he said quietly. "If a human smiles at you," he paused, "make sure you know why." I laughed. He didn't. 3 days later. Neither did anyone else. I was trying to decide which direction the dormitory wing was, when something large stepped directly in front of me and stopped. I looked up. Krath was a Vorai. If you have never seen a Vorai in person, the images do not prepare you. They are wide across the shoulders in a way that seems to defy reason, built like something that evolved specifically to fill a doorway and make you reconsider entering. His skin was dark amber, with a pattern of raised ridges running from his collar to his jaw, which is how Vorai show social rank. The more ridges, the more his family had historically stood over others. He had a lot of ridges. He looked down at me with the kind of calm that comes not from peace, but from the total certainty that nothing in the room could challenge him. "Velhari," he said. It was not a question. He said my species name the way you might say the word for mud. "You are in the wrong corridor." I checked the corridor sign. I was in the correct corridor. I told him so. He picked up my transit case. He looked at it. He set it down again roughly 2 meters to my left, closer to the wall. "Now you are in the correct corridor," he said and walked away. My roommate Sai, who had witnessed this from a careful distance, came over to help me retrieve the case. She was a fellow Velhari, and she had been at the academy for 1 full semester already. She had a look on her face that I would come to recognize over the following months. Not quite fear, not quite resignation, something in between. "That is Cray," she said unnecessarily. "I gathered," I replied. "He does that," she said. She did not say anything else about it. There was not much else to say. Croth was in his 2nd year at the academy. He was enrolled in the advanced political theory and interspecies law programs. He was by every academic measure a serious and capable student. His instructors praised his analytical mind. His peers gave him a very wide berth. The word that circulated most often about Krath, spoken quietly and never within his earshot, was this: he had been raised in a culture where power was demonstrated through the control of space, not just physical space, though that too, but the space between beings, the distance others kept from you. Whether they looked at you directly or found something else to study when you walked past, whether they moved aside or stayed where they were, Krath had learned somewhere in his upbringing that the only way to confirm your place in a hierarchy was to push others below you whenever the opportunity arose, and he was very good at finding opportunities. Over the first 3 weeks of my time at the academy, I cataloged what he did to others. I did this partly because I am by training and temperament an observer. I had come to the academy on a xenocultural studies scholarship, which means my entire purpose was to watch beings unlike myself and understand how they moved through the world. But I also cataloged it because watching Krath work was the only way to predict when and how he would come for me again. He took things, not valuable things, not in the obvious sense. He was not stealing in any way the Academy's conduct codes clearly addressed. He would move a student's study materials to a different terminal, just far enough away to cause inconvenience. He would sit in someone's claimed seat in the common hall until they gave up waiting and sat elsewhere, and then he would leave 2 minutes later. He spoke over. He stood just slightly too close when he spoke to smaller students, using his mass the way a weather system uses air pressure. Yet nothing he did was against any rule that anyone had written down. Sally told me one night when we were both too tired to sleep that 3 students had transferred out of the academy since Krath arrived. None of them had cited him directly as the reason. One had listed environmental incompatibility. One had said personal circumstances. One had simply not filed a reason at all. I did not want to transfer. I had worked too hard to be here. I had passed 17 qualifying examinations and written a thesis on cross-species social bonding behaviors that my home university called remarkable. I had wanted to be here since I was small enough to read the Academy's founding charter on a screen, 2 sizes too large for my face. So I learned to read Crayraft's patterns. I learned which terminals he favored. I learned to arrive at the common hall slightly early or slightly late. I learned to keep my lower eyes more active in corridors, watching for the shift in air movement that meant a large body was approaching from around a corner. I was in the language my species uses for this threading a needle I had not chosen. And then 8 weeks into the semester, C12 in Xenobiology lab was filled for the first time. The creature who sat down in it was small. This was the first thing I noticed. Small in the way that made other students near her instinctively shift their stools, not to give her room, but because they could not quite work out what she was. And proximity to an unknown thing is always a calculated risk. She had skin the color of deep, warm earth. Her hair was tightly coiled and pulled back from her face, which was round and calm and possessed of 2 eyes in the front of her head. Predator configuration, my xenobiology training said immediately in the back of my mind. Forward-facing eyes meant depth perception. Depth perception meant something that hunted. But she did not look like a hunter. She looked like someone who had just found a comfortable chair and was pleased about it. She set a battered data tablet on the lab bench and looked around the room with an expression I had never seen on any creature before. It was not the careful measuring look of someone doing threat assessment. It was not the bright, anxious look of someone hoping to make a good impression. It was simply open, curious, unburdened. Then she looked at me because I was in seat 13 directly to her left, and she bared her teeth. I do not have teeth. Velhari have a dental ridge smooth and flat, used for processing the fibrous plant material that makes up most of our diet. We do not bare them. The concept of baring one's dental equipment at a stranger did not exist in any form I was familiar with as a greeting. My upper limbs pulled inward. My secondary eyelids, the thin ones I cannot fully control, slid halfway across my lower eyes. The small creature's tooth-baring widened slightly. "Hi," she said. "I'm Mara. Mara OC. I just transferred from the Earth campus." I knew what Earth was. Every being in the civilized galaxy knew what Earth was. Earth was in the scientific literature classified as a Class 7 environmental pressure world. The short version of this classification is a world that has spent its entire geological history trying to eliminate everything living on it through a rotating schedule of ice, fire, geological upheaval, atmospheric toxicity, and the evolution of an extraordinary number of creatures whose primary biological innovation was finding new ways to end other creatures. The beings that survived on a Class 7 world were not, as a rule, small and soft and sitting calmly on a lab stool, smiling at strangers. I stared at her for what was probably too long. "I am Zen," I finally said, "a Velhari 5. "Cool," she said, and turned back to her tablet. I spent the rest of that class period watching her from the corner of my upper left eye, which is the one best suited to peripheral observation. She took notes in a hurried looping script. She asked the instructor 2 questions that were good enough that the instructor paused before answering. She ate something small and red from a pocket of her jacket midway through the session. chewed it twice, and made a face that suggested it was creating significant heat somewhere in her mouth. She did not look distressed by this. She looked, if anything, pleased. When the session ended, she shouldered her bag, looked over at me again, and said, "See you Thursday." I watched her walk out. My roommate Sally appeared at my shoulder. She had been in the row behind us. "The human smiled at you," she said. "Yes," I confirmed. "Were you afraid?" I thought about this carefully. "I was not sure what I was," I said. Sally nodded slowly. "I looked up humans once," she said. "Their planet has something called a lion. I am aware. And something called a mosquito. Yes. And the mosquito," she said, with the particular tone of someone delivering very bad news gently, "kills more of them than the lion does." We stood in the emptying lab room for a moment, both of us thinking about this, and she smiled. Sci finally said, "She did." I agreed. Silly picked up her bag. "Well," she said, "that is interesting. It was I would later understand the beginning of everything." The second week after Mara Owe arrived at the Galactic Concordat Academy, Professor Velik assigned us as lab partners. I found out the way most things were communicated at the Academy through the assignment board outside the Xenobiology wing, which updated every Monday at 6th hour. I had gone to check my practicum schedule and found my name listed next to hers in clean automated text. Zen of Velhari 5 OA Earth. I stood looking at this for a while. Zelly reading over my shoulder made a small sound that I believe was meant to be encouraging. It was not. I spent the weekend studying everything the Academy's research library held on humans. This was, it turned out, considerably less than I expected. There were 17 general biological surveys, most of them written by scholars who had never actually been to Earth and had assembled their information from remote sensing data, and the occasional diplomatic communicate. There were 2 longer ethnographic studies, both of which were flagged with the academic notation, meaning the researchers had subsequently revised their conclusions after field exposure. There was a short piece in the Journal of Interspecies Psychology, titled simply "On the Paradox of the Obligate Cooperative Predator," which I read 3 times and still found slightly troubling. The part that stayed with me most was a footnote almost buried in one of the biological surveys. It said, "Humans are, to the knowledge of current xenobiological science, the only known species to have evolved in a Class 7 pressure environment and subsequently chosen by cultural consensus to spend significant resources trying to help other beings, including beings that could easily harm them. The evolutionary mechanism for this behavior remains unclear." End quote. The footnote ended there. Whoever wrote it had apparently decided that was enough to say and moved on. On Thursday morning, I arrived at the lab 3 minutes early, set up my bench space with careful precision, reviewed the assigned experiment protocol twice, and told myself I was prepared. Mara arrived 1 minute later with a cup of something steaming in one hand and her data tablet in the other, dropped her bag on the bench, looked at the experimental setup and said, "Oh, nice. You already calibrated the sensors. That saves us like 10 minutes. She sat down, set her steaming cup on the far edge of the bench away from the equipment, and pulled up the protocol on her tablet. "So," she said without looking up, "what are we actually measuring today?" I read the summary, but it was kind of vague. I told her. She nodded, asked 2 clarifying questions that were again genuinely good. We began. Working with Mara Owe was not what I had expected. I had prepared in some part of my mind for difficulty, for miscommunication, for the careful navigation of 2 very different biological and cultural frameworks, trying to occupy the same bench space without causing an incident. What I had not prepared for was simple ease. She worked quickly and without fuss. She did not need things explained twice. When she was uncertain about a step, she said so directly without the social performance of pretending to know and hoping to figure it out before anyone noticed, which in my experience was how most students handled uncertainty. She laughed when something went slightly wrong with a culture sample and the contents distributed themselves across a wider area than intended. She cleaned it up, still laughing, reset the sample, and moved on. She asked me questions, not polite questions, the kind you ask to fill silence. Real questions about Velhari culture, about my home world, about what it felt like to have eyes that could move independently of each other. I told her that it was useful in unfamiliar environments, being able to watch two directions at once. Like prey does, she said. Matter of fact, not unkind. I looked at her. Sorry, she said immediately. That came out wrong. I just meant that's a really useful evolutionary adaptation. Wide field of vision. More information. Smart. Velhari were prey. I told her. Historically, there are large burrowing carnivores on our world. The Kaith. We evolved alongside them for about 200,000 years. And now the K are protected. There are fewer than 3,000 left. Mara nodded thoughtfully. What happened to them? We did, I said simply. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, yeah, that tracks. In a tone that I could not fully decode, but that did not seem to be judgment. By the third session, we had established a working rhythm that required very little adjustment. By the fifth, I had stopped arriving early to pre-calibrate because Mara calibrated faster than I did and seemed to find the process satisfying in a way that made me reluctant to take it from her. It was on a Friday, the 6th week of our partnership, that the cafeteria thing happened. The Academy's main meal hall was a large circular space with ceiling panels that cycled through a neutral light sequence designed to approximate something comfortable for the widest possible range of visual biology. It achieved this by being slightly wrong for everyone, which the Academy's pastoral support team described as equitably imperfect. Students mostly aid in informal clusters grouped by species, not because of any rule, but because familiarity is its own kind of comfort when you are very far from home. I had over the weeks begun arriving at meals at the same time as Mara. We did not plan this. It simply became a pattern the way patterns do when two beings are on the same schedule and find each other's company less taxing than silence. On this particular Friday, she set her tray down across from me, and my secondary eyelids activated immediately. Her food was making noise, a soft sizzling noise, as if it were still in the process of being cooked. It also had a smell, sharp and red somehow, though red is not a smell, but that is the only word that fit. It smelled like it was making a statement. Around us, 3 Chalari students at the next table had gone very still. A young Morvac to my left had turned his head 30 degrees, which for Morvac is the equivalent of a full stare. What? I said carefully. Is that chicken? Mara said, sitting down with hot sauce. They actually have a pretty decent synthetic meat program here. It's not exactly right, but it's close. The sauce, I said, capsaicin-based. Capsaicin is a compound some plants on Earth evolved to deter animals from eating their fruit. She picked up her utensil and cut a piece. Humans ate it anyway for like 10,000 years, and eventually bred hotter and hotter versions of the plant on purpose. One of the Kilari students made a sound. I believe it was involuntary. The plant, I said slowly, evolved a chemical to stop animals from eating it. Yeah. And your species, I said, ate it anyway. We really liked the taste once we got used to the pain part. The pain part, said the Morvac to my left, who had apparently been listening and could no longer help himself. Mara looked over at him pleasantly. Hey, yeah, capsaicin triggers pain receptors. The brain interprets it as heat. Your mouth feels like it's burning even though it isn't. We eat it for fun. The Morvac stared at her. You eat pain? He said. For fun? Some of us? Yeah. She ate the piece of chicken, chewed it. Her eyes were bright. Also, humans invented something called competitive eating, where you try to eat as much of a specific food as possible in a fixed amount of time, faster than other humans. There are professional rankings. As the Morvac stood up, picked up his tray, and moved to a different table, he did not say anything. He simply left. Mara watched him go with an expression of mild curiosity and no apparent concern. I was still thinking about the pain thing when the light in the room changed the way it always did when Krath entered. It was not a literal change. The ceiling panels did not flicker, but there was a shift, a subtle collective adjustment in posture around the hall, back straightened, conversations lowered. The comfortable noise of 500 beings eating a meal together pulled itself in by a few degrees. Like a tide going slightly out, Krath moved through the room with 2 of his usual companions, large Vorkai, though not as large as him, who positioned themselves slightly behind and to his sides in the social formation that said, he leads, we follow. This is the order of things. They got food and moved toward the center of the hall. Then Kraft noticed Mara. Or rather, he noticed the small creature at my table who was eating something that was making nearby beings move away, and who had not adjusted her posture, or lowered her voice, or done any of the things that the room had collectively done when he walked in. He changed his path slightly, not dramatically, just enough to bring him past our table instead of through the center of the room. He stopped. Soft, he said. It was his word for earthlings. I had heard him use it before to other humans he had encountered on campus. Always with the same flat delivery. Eating earthling food. I have heard earth food is barely worth the name, barely worth the table you are sitting at. Mara looked up at him, and I want to be precise about this because I have replayed it in my memory many times since. She did not flinch. She did not shift her weight. She did not perform the small unconscious movements that most beings I had ever observed made when a Vorai addressed them directly at close range. The slight lean back, the secondary eyelid or equivalent, the tightening around the face. She just looked at him and ate another piece of chicken. Kraft's ridge pattern shifted. It was subtle, just a small darkening along the jaw, the Vorkai equivalent of recalibrating. Did you hear me? Soft. He said slightly louder. I heard you, Mara said. Her voice was conversational, not raised, not tight, not performing anything, just a voice saying words. Kraft looked at her for a long moment. I could see him working through some kind of internal calculation. His companions had moved slightly forward, but he had not given them any signal to do anything yet. He was in the middle of a social exchange whose expected outcome was not quite materializing, and he had not yet decided what that meant. You are new, he said finally. You will learn. He moved on. His companions followed. Mara watched him go, the same mild curiosity on her face that she had pointed at the departing Morvac 10 minutes earlier. Then she looked at me. Does that happen to you a lot? She asked. I considered how to answer this with some regularity. I said. She was quiet for a moment, still looking at the direction Kraft had gone. Not with anger exactly, with something more like the focused, assessing look she used when a lab result came back unexpected, and she was working out what it meant. How long has he been doing that? She asked. Since my first day, I said. She looked at me then directly, the forward-facing predator eyes settling on my face with a quality of attention that I had come to recognize as Mara away being fully present to a thing she considered worth being present to. That's a long time, she said. I agreed that it was. She picked up her fork again. Is anyone going to stop him? I thought about the 3 students who had transferred, about Cell's careful routing through corridors, about the way 500 students had pulled their conversations inward when he walked into a room. I do not think anyone believes it is possible, I said. Mara ate the last piece of chicken. She was quiet for a while. The cafeteria noise had returned to its normal level, the collective exhale of a room that had been watched and then stopped being watched. Huh, she said just that one sound, but there was something in it that I filed away without knowing why. That night, Selly and I were both in our room, both nominally studying, both actually sitting with our tablets dark and not quite saying what we were thinking. This had become a habit. The human did not move. Selly finally said she did not. I confirmed. Kraft spoke directly at her. He did. Selly was quiet for a moment. She ate the pain food. Yes. And she did not move. Selly said again, as though the repetition might help her make sense of it. I had spent the walk home from the cafeteria thinking about the footnote in the biological survey, the one about the obligate cooperative predator, the one about the evolutionary mechanism that remained unclear. Selly, I said, yes. Do you know what Earth's gravity is? She looked at me. I believe it is notably higher than the galactic average. Why? Because every muscle Mara Oe has, I said slowly, working it out as I spoke, was built in a gravity well heavier than this building was designed for. She has been walking around this campus, in what is for her body reduced gravity for months. Selly stared at me. And before this campus, I continued, she spent her whole life on a world that tried to end her species at every turn. Bacteria that kill from the inside. Atmospheric pressure capable of crushing some species outright. Large predators, small predators, microscopic predators, plants that evolved chemical weapons and then watched humans eat them. Anyway, the room was very quiet. And she came here, I said, and sat down in seat 12 and smiled at a stranger and ate her pain food and did not move when Krath spoke to her. Selly sat with this for a long time. Zen, she finally said. Yes, I think she said carefully that Krath may have made a mistake. I thought about the look on Mara's face when she had asked if anyone was going to stop him, the quality of attention she had given to the direction he walked away. I think I said you may be right. I turned my tablet on. Outside the dormitory window, the academy campus was dark, except for the light fixtures along the walking paths, steady and patient, and thoroughly unaware of what was coming. 6 days later, everything changed in the common hall in front of everyone. It started the way things like this always start, not with a dramatic announcement or a build-up that gave anyone time to prepare, but with something ordinary going wrong in a way that crossed an invisible line, and then the invisible line being crossed, and no one being able to pretend they had not seen it. It was a Thursday, 2 hours before evening meal, and the main common hall on the 3rd residential level was at about half capacity. This was the busy study period when students who had afternoon labs were settling in with their materials before the rush of the dinner hour. The hall was wide and bright, with long shared tables and individual study alcoves along the west wall. There was a low background of voices and the soft sounds of people working, the tap of styluses, the occasional ping of a research notification, the rustle of material being organized and reorganized. I was at one of the long tables near the center of the room, working on the documentation for a project I had spent 11 weeks building. It was my major submission for the Xenocultural Integration module, a detailed observational study of cross-species social bonding patterns in shared academic environments, with specific attention to the informal support structures that students built outside of official academy programming. It was the work I was most proud of since arriving at the academy. I had 300 pages of observation notes, 2 complete analytical frameworks that I had built myself, and a central argument that my faculty advisor had called genuinely original. In the margins of my draft, the project components were spread across the table in front of me, the data tablet with my written work, a secondary physical backup drive because I had learned never to trust a single storage format after a power incident in my 2nd week. Printed diagram sheets that I used when I needed to see the structural relationships between ideas in a format larger than a tablet screen. A set of annotated source materials organized by color code along the left edge of the table. I was deep in revising a section on Vorkai social dynamics which I had written with considerable care, knowing that Krath existed and that the Academy's review panels were thorough when I heard the shift in the room. Not sound exactly, or not only sound. The particular quality of attention in a shared space has a texture to it, and when that texture changes, some part of you notices before your conscious mind does. I had become good at reading this shift over the past several months. I looked up cranians had come in through the north entrance. They were moving through the room in their usual formation, and I could see immediately that something was different tonight. Krayraf's ridge pattern was darker than usual. The amber brown of his skin shifted towards something deeper, which in Vorai biology indicates elevated agitation. I did not know what had agitated him. I did not have time to wonder. He saw me before I could do anything about being seen. I did the calculation quickly. I could not move my project materials fast enough to make it look natural. Standing up would draw more attention, not less. The olives along the west wall were too far away. I was, as my species would say, in open ground. Krath changed course toward my table. I kept my posture still and my lower eyes on my tablet and told myself that perhaps he would do the minor thing, the displacement of an object, the too close passage, the brief comment left like a bruise that no one could see. These things I had learned to absorb. These things I had categorized and documented and filed into the part of my mind where I kept experiences I was managing rather than experiences I was having. He stopped at the edge of my table. I looked up. "Velhari," he said. His voice was louder than usual. Loud enough that the nearest tables had gone quiet. loud enough to establish an audience which told me this was not going to be the minor thing. "Is this your work?" "Yes," I said. He looked at the spread of materials, the diagram sheets, the color-coded sources, the project that I had spent 11 weeks building. "It seems like a lot," he said. For a creature with prey eyes around us, the common hall had gone from half-attentive to fully attentive. I could feel it the way you feel, a pressure change before weather arrives. I did not say anything. I had learned that responses did not improve these situations. They only lengthened them. Krath reached out and picked up the top sheet of my printed diagrams. He looked at it. His expression did not change. He set it back down, not where it had been, but offset, overlapping the annotated sources in a way that would require reorganization. This was the familiar move. I felt myself begin the slow exhale of someone absorbing the minor thing. Then he picked up the entire stack of diagram sheets, all 14 pages of structural relationship maps, and dropped them on the floor. The sound was small. Paper is light. It drifted more than fell, spreading across the floor in a wide arc, some sheets sliding under the neighboring table, one drifting to rest near the foot of a Celery student 4 meters away. The Celery student did not reach down to stop it. Nobody moved. I sat looking at my work on the floor. The common hall was very quiet now, not the thoughtful quiet of people working, the held breath quiet of people watching something happen and hoping that staying still would make them invisible. Krayraf's companions were to his left and right, and their posture said, "This is how it is. This is the order. This is what you observe and then do not discuss." I looked at my diagram sheets on the floor. 11 weeks of structural thinking spread across the common hall like something discarded. I thought about the Velhari expression for this feeling. Not quite humiliation, not quite defeat. The specific feeling of having something that was yours, treated as though it were nothing, in front of witnesses who said nothing because the being doing the treating was too large for anyone to confront. I did not stand up. I was calculating, not consciously, but in that deep old cellular way my species had developed over 200,000 years, alongside the K, whether the cost of standing up was a cost I could pay. And then a chair scraped, not at my table, across the room. I looked up. Mara Oche had been in one of the west alcoves. I had not known she was there. She had apparently been working quietly the way she always did. Present, but unobtrusive, easy to overlook, which humans could do with a skill that still surprised me, given how clearly a predator's eyes sat in the front of her face. She was standing now. She had set her tablet face down on the alcove desk. She had set down her stylus. She picked up nothing. She brought nothing with her. She walked toward the center of the room. Later I would think about that walk many times, searching for the right words for it, the right frame. In the xenocultural literature, there is a concept used to describe the movement quality of apex predators in environments they consider their own. Not aggressive, not tense, not performing anything. Simply the movement of a creature that has assessed the space and found nothing in it that changes the way it intends to move. Economy certainty. The walk of something that has not been taught to be afraid of this particular situation because its whole species grew up in situations considerably more difficult than this one. Mara Owe walked across the common hall like she owned the floor she was walking on. Not arrogantly, just accurately. She stopped at the edge of my table. She was standing between me and Krath. Krath was a full head and broad shoulders above her. The size differential was not something either of them could have been unaware of. Krayraf's companions had straightened slightly, their own posture adjusting to the presence of this small creature who had apparently not understood what this situation was and what role she was supposed to play in it. Mara looked at the diagram sheets on the floor. She looked at Krath. "Pick those up," she said. Not loudly, not with the tight raised pitch that beings use when they are afraid, but pushing through it. Just quiet, level, the tone of someone stating the obvious next step in a sequence of events. The common hall held its breath. Krath looked down at her. His ridge pattern shifted again, the darkening moving further up toward his temples, which on a Vorai is an indicator I had never seen this close before. In my notes, I had categorized it as a signal of territorial activation. the deep old part of a Vorkai brain responding to something it could not properly categorize. "Small, soft creature," he said, and his voice had a low warning in it. "You do not understand where you are standing." "I understand exactly where I'm standing," Mara said. "Pick up his work." One of Krath's companions moved forward slightly. Mara's eyes moved to him, a single smooth redirection of attention, and then back to Krath. The companion stopped. "This does not involve you," Krath said. "It involves everyone watching," she said, "which is everyone in this room. Pick it up." The silence in the common hall was now total. I do not use that word carelessly. I mean that the usual ambient sounds of a room full of living beings had simply ceased. No breathing that I could hear, no movement, a collective suspension like a moment caught between two states. Krath looked at Mara Owe for a long moment, and I saw it. The thing I had not expected to see. I had watched Krath for months. I had catalogued the way he read rooms, assessed bodies, measured the gap between himself and any being who might attempt to push back. I knew his pattern. I had thought I understood it completely. What I saw on his face now was not what I expected. It was not anger. It was uncertainty. A Vortka's threat assessment is evolutionary, same as anything else. Built over hundreds of thousands of years of social competition within their own species, within a species where size and ridge pattern and the confidence to advance into contested space determine social position. Their biology was calibrated to read these signals and respond accordingly. Mara Owe was small. Mara Owe had no ridge pattern, no threat coloration, no size advantage, no social history within this institution that would give her standing in the hierarchy. Mara Owe also had not moved 1 centimeter from where she had planted her feet. She had not shifted her weight back. She had not blinked at the wrong moment. She had not done any of the things, conscious or unconscious, that Krath's entire evolutionary framework had been built to look for as signals of submission. And this absence of the expected signal, this creature standing in front of him, producing none of the information his body knew how to process. This was what had created the uncertainty on his face. He had never encountered this before, not because he had never faced defiance, but because every defiance he had ever encountered had come with fear underneath it, the elevated posture of someone trying to be bigger, the voice slightly too loud to cover a tremor, the eyes that held steady but at cost. These things he knew, these things he could read and respond to and dissolve. Mara Owe was not afraid. She was not even, as far as I could read her, performing, not being afraid. She simply was not afraid. She was standing in front of a creature that outmasked her by a significant margin in a room full of witnesses, and her body was doing nothing that suggested she had processed this as a dangerous situation. Because I realized somewhere in the back of my xenobiology-trained mind, because she had spent her entire life on a world where dangerous situations were the texture of ordinary experience. Krath was large on Earth. Large things that could harm you were not unusual. The question was what you could do about it. And Mara Owe, standing in the common hall of the Galactic Concordat Academy, 2 meters from a Vorai who had never been told no, had clearly already run that calculation and arrived somewhere Krath could not follow. She waited. The room waited, and then Krath, for the first time in the months I had been watching him, made a choice I had not predicted. He moved forward. It was not a step back. It was not compliance. It was a decision to end the stalemate by removing it, by moving into the space between them and making Mara Owe step back or be stepped into. It was the move that had always worked. The basic physics of a larger body claiming space from a smaller one. The thing that every being in this room and in his history had responded to in the only way available to them. Mara Owe did not step back. She moved. It was not what I expected, and I had been watching Mara for 2 months. It was not what anyone expected, because there was no model for it in any of our experience. She did not brace. She did not attempt to match his advance with a counter-advance. She did something that only made sense if you understood that she had spent her entire formative existence learning to move around things considerably faster and larger and more dangerous than a Vorai political theory student on an interspecies campus. She stepped to the side, A single short movement that cost her nothing and left Crayraft's forward motion going past her rather than into her, and in the same motion, smooth and compact and carrying no extra energy, she redirected. I will not dress it up into something more dramatic than it was. It was 4 seconds. It was not a brawl. It was not even, by Mara's later description, close. What it was this. A Vorai who had never learned that moving forward was not the same as winning. Discovering that information in the common hall of the Galactic Concordat Academy in front of 200 witnesses through the simplest possible demonstration of the difference. Krath went down, not sprawling, not dramatically. He went down in the way that something large goes down when its center of gravity has been moved by something that knew exactly where to move it, and suddenly the floor is closer than expected. He hit the hall floor and stayed there for a moment that was long enough to be real and short enough to still be recoverable if anyone pretended not to have fully processed it. Mara took one step back. Her breathing had not changed. Her face had the focused, assessing look I knew from the lab when an experiment produced an unexpected result. She looked at Krath on the floor. Then she looked at his 2 companions. They had not moved, which was the right read. Neither of them wanted to be a second demonstration. Then she turned to me. "We should pick those up," she said, and looked at my diagram sheets, still spread across the floor. She bent down and started collecting them. For a moment, I could not move. I was a xenocultural studies scholar who had spent months watching this room and its dynamics and documenting the ways that power settled into space and shaped the behavior of everyone inside it. I had watched Krath rearrange the academy around himself, the way a stone in a stream rearranges the water. I had not until 30 seconds ago understood that streams could move stones. I started collecting my diagram sheets. Academy security arrived 7 minutes later. A response time that I noted was consistent with standard procedure for a minor physical incident. Mara was sitting on the edge of my table when they came in, helping me reorganize my annotated sources back into their color-coded order. She stood up when they approached, introduced herself fully, gave her student identification number before they asked for it, and described the sequence of events in calm, precise language that contained no dramatization and no omission. Krath and his companions had not left. Krath was upright again, standing with the particular stillness of someone who has just recalibrated everything they thought they understood about a room and has not yet decided what to do with the new information. The security officers took statements from 4 student witnesses. I watched this happen while Mara finished helping me sort the last of my diagram sheets. She stacked them carefully, squared the edges, and set them at the top left corner of the table the way she had seen me keep them. "The argument framework in Section 3, she said, glancing at the top sheet, is good. The part about informal support structures actually shifting power dynamics. You should expand that section. I think there's more to say there." I looked at her. "What?" She said. "You just," I said, and stopped and tried again. I know," she said, and her voice was quieter now. The post-event quiet of someone who had done a thing and was now back in ordinary time. "Are you okay?" No one had asked me that in a long time, not in this context, not in a way that meant specifically what it meant at this specific moment. "I am," I said, and found that I mostly meant it. "Are you?" She thought about it, which I appreciated. She did not give me the automatic answer. "Yeah," she said, "I'm okay." She picked up her bag. The security officers had finished with the initial statements and were beginning the formal report process, which would take considerably longer and which we would both have to return for. Outside the common hall windows, the campus lights were coming on in the early evening, the paths lit in warm intervals through the dark. 4 seconds, I said. She looked at me. "What?" "The whole thing," I said. "From when you moved to when it was done, I was counting 4 seconds. Mara Oe smiled. The tooth-bearing that I had by now completely recalibrated my response to. It no longer produced secondary eyelid activation. It produced something else, something I did not quite have a word for yet in any language I knew, though I was beginning to think I might need to find one. We didn't evolve to be the biggest thing on our planet. She said we evolved to be quick enough, good enough, clever enough, and stubborn enough to keep trying even when we were losing. She shifted her bag on her shoulder. 4 seconds is about right. She walked toward the door, paused, looked back at me. Same time for lab tomorrow. Same time, I said. She left. I sat down at my table in the common hall that was now buzzing again with voices. Not the suppressed, careful voices of a room managing itself around a pressure system, but the released, alive voices of 200 people who had just watched something shift. And I opened my project document and went back to section 3. She was right. There was more to say. What followed the common hall incident was not simple. It never is. When something that has been one way for a long time suddenly becomes a different way. The Academy's formal conduct review was opened within 24 hours. This was standard. What was not standard was the number of students who came forward with statements. Not asked to, not required to, but choosing to. A Kalari student from Kraft's political theory class, a Morvox scholar who had never spoken to me before, 2 Vitali students who had been in the common hall that Thursday and offered their recorded observations without prompting, even a young Vorai student, first year, who filed a statement in writing and requested anonymity, and whose account of the months of low-level displacement and intimidation matched my own documentation in ways I had not expected. Mara and I both went through the formal process. It took 3 sessions over 2 weeks. She was direct and exact in all of them, the same calm, precise language she had used with the security officers. I gave my documentation, all of it, the 300 pages of observation notes that had entirely by accident become the most complete record of the situation that the review panel possessed. My faculty advisor, who had reviewed my project materials after the incident, called me into her office and looked at me across her desk for a long moment before speaking. I recommended your project for the Senior Academic Prize. She said the argument in Section 3 about informal power dynamics shaping institutional behavior. It is no longer merely theoretical. I did not know what to say to this, so I said, "Thank you." She nodded. "How are you?" "I am writing more." I said, "I find that helps." "And your lab partner?" I thought about how to describe Mara Owe in terms that would translate across the significant gulf between my faculty advisor's experience and the reality of what I had been sitting next to in xenobiology lab for 2 months. I thought about the hot sauce, and the good questions, and the calibration work, and the 4 seconds, and the quiet way she had helped me reorganize my diagram sheets while the room was still catching its breath around us. "She is," I said, "very interesting." The conduct review panel reached its findings 6 weeks after the incident. Craycraft received a formal conduct notice, required conflict resolution sessions, and was moved out of 2 shared courses with students who had provided statements. These were not dramatic consequences. By some measures, they were also, by the measure of the Academy's existing framework, the most significant formal response to a pattern of behavior that had gone undocumented and therefore unrest for more than a year. I have been told by students who know Croft's situation better than I do, that the experience of being documented, of discovering that someone had been writing it all down carefully and completely for months, was what hit him hardest. Not the 4 seconds, though that had clearly struck something foundational in his self-understanding. The documentation, the discovery that he had been seen, and that being seen had consequences. In the xenocultural literature, there is a principle called the observer effect, the phenomenon by which the act of watching a thing changes it. My faculty advisor liked to say this was more true of social systems than physical ones because social systems know when they are being watched, and they adjust. Kraft knew he was being watched now. Everyone knew the common hall on the 3rd residential level was in the weeks after a different room than it had been before. Not louder exactly, but more itself. Students ate in their usual clusters, but the posture was different. People took up the full space of their chairs. Conversations maintained their natural volume when Crarath walked in. The tide that had pulled itself in now went out to its normal distance and stayed there. I noticed all of this. I wrote it down, I added it to the project. Now titled at my faculty advisor's suggestion, The Structure of Yielded Space, a study in informal power and collective behavior in a multi-ACES academic environment. It won the Senior Academic Prize that year. Mara O, when I told her, looked at me for a moment, and then said, obviously she was eating something again, that was producing a smell that made the student next to her at the lunch table shift slightly away, but she had by now established enough of a presence in this room that the shifting was less pronounced than it once had been. Even the most cautious beings will eventually recalibrate what is normal when the normal thing is simply present every day and does not in fact harm them. 6 weeks after the prize announcement, I was sitting in my faculty advisor's office, completing the corrections on the final draft, when she asked me if I was planning the follow-up study she expected I was planning. Yes, I said I want to write about humans specifically. There is a gap in the literature. Most of the xenobiology surveys are assembled at a distance. I want to do close observation. You have a subject in mind, she said. She has agreed. I said conditionally, she said, and I am quoting directly. Sure, but if you get weird about it, I'm going to be upfront with you, which she also says about everything else. So, I considered this a reasonable condition. My faculty advisor's face did a thing that I had come to recognize as suppressed amusement. How would you describe her? I had been thinking about this question in various forms for 2 months. I had pages of notes. I had analytical frameworks and observational data, and a growing set of references in the xenobiological literature that I was building into a secondary argument. I had the specific memory of Mara walking across the common hall with nothing in her hands, and nothing in her posture except the total assurance of something that had never learned to be afraid of this particular kind of situation. She is, I said carefully, a product of her world, the same way we all are, but her world built her differently than ours built us. I thought about the footnote. The obligate cooperative predator. The evolutionary mechanism for this behavior remains unclear. She is a being who grew up in conditions that should by most xenobiological models have produced something harder. I said more closed, more given to threat assessment and self-preservation at the expense of cooperation. Instead, it produced someone who shares her food and asks good questions and helps pick up diagram sheets off the floor. I paused and also hits with significant precision when the situation calls for it. I think those things are related. I am trying to understand how. My faculty advisor nodded slowly. And this project began, she said, as an observation of cross-species social bonding patterns in shared academic environments. Yes, I said, and it has ended as something else. I looked at the pages in front of me. 367 pages now, with the new section and a second study just beginning. I think it ended as the same thing. I said, I just understand the thing better now. She made the suppressed amusement face again and said nothing further about it. I submitted the final draft that afternoon. I walked back from the academic wing to the dormitory through the campus paths, the light doing its late-day thing where the artificial sun panels begin their slow shift toward the warm end of the spectrum, and the whole academy takes on a particular quality that I had come to find unexpectedly like home. Mara was sitting outside the dormitory entrance tablet in her lap, doing something that produced occasional small sounds of disagreement from her direction, the noise she made when a source was arguing something she found unconvincing to. She had a cup of something on the step beside her. It smelled manageable, which by Mara's standards meant it was probably water. Done, she said without looking up. Submitted, I said. Good. She made another small noise of disagreement at her tablet. This author is wrong about something, and I can't quite nail down what yet. I sat on the step beside her. The campus was at the quiet hour between afternoon sessions and evening, the in-between time when most people were somewhere else, and the outdoor spaces belonged to whoever was there. Mara, I said. Yeah, I have a question for the study. She looked up from her tablet. The forward-facing predator eyes settled on my face with their characteristic quality of complete attention. Okay. In the common hall, I said. Were you afraid? She was quiet for a moment, not deflecting, thinking. I knew the difference by now. Yeah, she said. I had not expected this answer. You were? Of course. He's big. I didn't know exactly how he'd react. Unknown situations have risk. She looked back at her tablet, turned a page. But being afraid doesn't really change what you do, does it? Not once you've decided what needs to happen. For most beings, I said carefully, it changes what they do considerably. She did not disagree. Exactly. I think humans used to be more like that. We probably had to unlearn it, Or I don't know, maybe we learned something else instead, being afraid and doing the thing. Anyway, we got good at that somewhere along the way. She found what she had been looking for in the article, made a short, satisfied sound, and started writing in the margin. "It is your whole history," I said. She looked up briefly, surprised, then smiled. "Yeah," she said, "pretty much." I opened my own tablet. The follow-up study's first section header was already there, waiting on the paradox of the obligate cooperative predator, a close observational study. I added my first line below it. "Humans are afraid of many things. They do them anyway. This has been, as far as I can determine, the defining characteristic of their species since they first stood upright on a world that was trying to prevent exactly that." Outside the dormitory, the campus path lights began coming on one by one, steady and patient in the gathering dark. I kept writing. 3 months after the Common Hall incident, the Academy's Xenocultural Journal published a call for student submissions on the theme of unexpected encounters. Those moments in cross-species academic experience that changed the way a student understood something fundamental. My faculty advisor forwarded me the notice with no comment other than, "I believe you have something relevant." I submitted a piece of 30 pages. The journal's editors wrote back and asked if I could expand it. I said yes. The expanded version ran to 62 pages and was titled "In the End," with 3 words that had been sitting in my notes since the morning after the Common Hall, and that I could not improve upon no matter how many alternatives I considered. "Do not mistake softness for safety." The editors liked this. They put it on the cover. Mara, when she saw the advanced copy, looked at it for a while and then said, "Is that about me?" "It is about humans," I said carefully. "You are the specific human I know. So yes, yes." She nodded. "Read the first page. Read it again. Set it down. Picked it up." I had learned by now that this was Mara processing something she found unexpectedly significant, which she handled by pretending she was not processing it, while clearly processing it very thoroughly. "The part about the mosquito is in here," she said finally. "It is. And the hot sauce. It is. And the smile on the first day that made you do the secondary eyelid thing." I experienced a mild warm pressure in my upper face that Velhari show when they are feeling something they do not have a precise word for. It is in there. I felt it was relevant to establishing the early observational period. Mara put the journal down, looked at the campus outside the common room window, which was the quiet common room on the east side of the 3rd residential building, a smaller room with fewer people that we had come to use on weekend mornings when the large hall felt like too much noise. "Zen," she said. "Yes. Did you actually think I was going to harm you that first day in lab? I considered this with the care it deserved." "No," I said, "I do not think I thought you were going to harm me. I think I did not have a framework for what you were, and unknown things require careful processing, and my body did some careful processing before my brain had finished catching up." "That's fair," she said. "Humans do that too. Different reflex, same basic mechanism." "What is your reflex?" I asked. It was a study question, but also a real question, which with Mara were usually the same thing. She thought about it. "We get very still," she said, "when something's genuinely surprising, like really still, very fast." I don't know if you've noticed. I had noticed. I had a note about it filed under Human Pre-Assessment Behavior, with a cross-reference to the entry on apex predator micro-stillness in the biological survey I had first read the night before our partnership began. "I have noticed," I said, "it's the brain doing triage." She said, "Sorting information, figuring out if this is the kind of thing that needs fast response or slow response." She picked up her tea. "I think it's leftover from when things wanted to eat us. Many things still want to eat you. I pointed out your world has not changed significantly in that respect." "Yeah, but now we have houses," she said, with the particular satisfied tone of someone who has just cited what they consider a conclusive point. I wrote this exchange down in my notebook later that evening, under the heading on the recursive humor of a species that evolved alongside predators and now considers architecture a satisfying counterargument. The article in the Xenocultural Journal generated a response I had not anticipated. Not wide public attention. It was an academic journal, with a readership of mostly scholars and dedicated students. But within that readership, something that felt like a held breath being released. I received 16 messages from students at other campuses, 3 from researchers at home institutions, and 1 from an anthropologist at the Velhari Interspecies Studies Center who said, "My methodology was, and I am paraphrasing her language slightly, so obvious in retrospect that it is stunning no one has done it. What I had done, which apparently felt new, was simply sit next to a human for 2 months and pay attention. I had not assembled data from a distance. I had not run models or consulted existing frameworks or tried to fit Mara away into the categories that previous researchers had built from the outside looking in. I had been assigned seat 13 and been smiled at in a way that activated my secondary eyelids, and then I had chosen to keep paying attention. The evolutionary mechanism for the behavior remains unclear," the footnote had said. "I think now that this is because the researchers who wrote the footnote were looking for a mechanism the way you look for a cause of something unusual. They wanted to understand what had made humans this way, cooperative and protective of others, even at cost to themselves, as though it were an anomaly requiring explanation, as though softness in a world of claws and venom and geological upheaval needed to be justified. I think the mechanism is simply this, that everything hard enough produces the thing that can endure it, and that the thing that can endure everything eventually has the surplus to give some of what it has to something else. Humans had endured their world for long enough that they had something left over. They chose to spend it on other people. Not always, not without cost, not without fear, but often enough, and in enough of the moments that counted, that it had become part of what they were. Mara Oe had been afraid in the common hall. She had told me so directly, which was itself a very human thing to do. The direct acknowledgement of fear without apology, as though fear were simply a piece of information to be noted and then set aside if it was not serving a useful function. She had been afraid, and she had done the thing anyway, because she had looked at the situation and determined that it needed to be done. 4 seconds. I have since had many conversations with her about Earth and what it is like to grow up there. She describes it the way people describe places they love, that are also trying to constantly kill them with exasperation and enormous affection. The way you speak of something that shaped you, and that you are therefore unable to fully separate from what you are. She misses specific things, a particular kind of light in the morning, the sound of certain weather, food that no synthetic program has quite managed to replicate. She does not miss the parts that are dangerous. Specifically, the way someone might miss a danger they are grateful to be away from. She does not seem to experience her home world as something she escaped. She seems to experience it as something she came from. The way a tree comes from soil completely, and with the shape of it still present in everything she does. Selly, my roommate, who has been cautiously warming to Mara since the night she told me about the mosquito, recently asked Mara what the most difficult thing about living off Earth was. Mara considered the question thoroughly, which she always did. "The gravity is too low," she said. "I keep stepping too hard. I've knocked over more things in this building in 1 semester than I have in my entire life before this." Oe stared at her. "That is what you find most difficult." "There's also some foods I miss," Mara added. "Not," the city said carefully and gestured at the air in a way that indicated the range of dangers that Earth represented as a residential environment. "Oh, that's stuff I'm used to," Mara said. "The low gravity is new." Selly later told me she had gone back to her bunk and lain on it for a while thinking about this, and that she felt it had reorganized something in her understanding of the universe. "I understand. I felt the same way the first time." Mara smiled at me in seat 12, and I have been reorganizing my understanding of the universe in increments since then. I submitted my journal article on a Tuesday. On Wednesday, I attended the prize ceremony for the senior academic project, where my faculty advisor said things about my work that I will not repeat here because they were embarrassing, in a way I found pleasant and that I did not know how to describe at the time. Mara sat in the audience and at the relevant moment performed a specific human behavior involving bringing the palms together repeatedly to make a rhythmic sound which I had learned by now was called clapping and which indicated approval rather than aggression. So I no longer braced when it happened. On Thursday we had lab. It was the last scheduled lab of the semester. Professor Velik gave a short closing address about the nature of xenobiological study and the importance of sitting with uncertainty rather than rushing past it toward the comfort of a conclusion. Mara beside me nodded at several points with the expression she wore when someone said something she already believed and was pleased to have confirmed. When the session ended, we packed up our bench the way we always did, Mara doing the calibration and the equipment stow, me organizing the written materials, neither of us needing to ask the other what they were doing because we had been doing it for months and it had become as natural as walking. We carried our bags out into the corridor. "Next semester," she said. "Yes," I said. "Different lab partner assignment." "Almost certainly," she nodded. We walked for a moment in comfortable silence, the way we had learned to walk together, not matched in stride because our biology did not match, but comfortable in the difference, each of us taking up the space we needed. "You could request a renewal," I said. "Of the same partnership." She looked at me sideways. "So, could you?" I had already drafted the request. It was sitting in my outbox unsent because I had not been certain how to characterize it in the official field that asked for the academic justification for a partnership renewal. The field was small. My reason was not, "I am writing a study on humans." I said close observational methodology. I believe continued proximity to the subject would benefit the research. Mara Oche made the noise she made when she was trying not to smile. "Zen," she said. "Yes, you can just say you want to keep working together." I had filled 608 pages of notes across 2 studies about human directness. I had written a prize-winning analysis of informal social bonding structures in cross-species environments. I had documented in 40 languages of behavioral science the particular quality of a being who was so comfortable being honest about what she wanted that it sometimes briefly short-circuited beings who were not used to it. "I want to keep working together," I said. Mara Oy smiled. The full thing, the one that had activated my secondary eyelids the first time I saw it in C12. The one that I now knew meant, "I am glad to be here in this specific place, with this specific person, in this specific moment, and I am not performing anything. I am just telling you that in the most direct way my face knows how." "Okay," she said. "Me too." We walked out into the campus afternoon, the sky panels cycling toward their warm late-hour setting, the paths busy with students moving between buildings and between versions of who they had been and who they were becoming. I sent the partnership renewal request from my outbox while we were still walking. In the justification field, I wrote ongoing research, original subject, continued observation, yielding results of significant scholarly value. Then I added, because Mara's influence on my communication style had been measurable and documented, a second line. Also, I submitted it before I could reconsider. But beside me, Mara did not know I had done this, and was talking about something she had read about Earth-ocean currents that she thought had an interesting parallel to the information flow patterns I was modeling in the second study. And I was listening and writing in my mental notes and watching the campus with all 4 of my eyes in a way that no longer felt like threat assessment, but simply like being somewhere I was glad to be and wanting to see all of it. 11 weeks ago, Krath had told me I was in the wrong corridor. I am not, I can say with some confidence, in the wrong corridor. I am in fact exactly where I am supposed to be, and the being in seat 12, the one who walked across the common hall with nothing in her hands and said something right in 4 seconds and then asked me if I was okay, is walking beside me. I had come to the Galactic Concordat Academy to study how different beings learn to exist alongside each other. I had expected to observe this from a careful distance. I had expected to document it through the measured language of academic inquiry and organized notes and properly formatted citations. I had not expected to become part of it. I did not know. Sitting in seat 13 on the first day, watching a small creature from a world that spent 200,000 years trying to eliminate her species smile at me with her bone weapons and ask my name, that I was about to understand something. I had been studying for years without ever quite seeing beings build each other slowly, imperfectly, with considerable miscommunication along the way, and the occasional situation that requires 4 seconds and a very precise understanding of where to place your weight. They build each other through the ordinary things, the shared benches and the good questions, and the willingness to help pick up the things that have been knocked down. They build each other through the moment when someone who had every reason to stay in her alcove and keep her eyes on her tablet stood up instead and walked across a room that had gone quiet with the weight of something being wrong. This is what my research had been circling for months trying to name. It is what she told me. At the end, without meaning to teach me anything, you find something that needs to happen, and then afraid or not, you do it. And then you ask if the other person is okay.